A miscarriage of justice. Donald Trump found guilty in a Manhattan courtroom. What's the ripple effect? What will happen at the election? Will this help Donald Trump? Will this affect our economy? Is the world laughing at us? And how do we restore trust in our two-tiered justice system? Well, we're going to hear from Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, plus the Chief Communications Officer for Job Creators Network, Elaine Parker, and National Spokesman for the Association of Mature American Citizens, Robert Charles. We're brought to you by the Job Creators Network and AMAC. My name's Larry O'Connor, and it's time for the Roundtable. Well, the domino effect continues from yesterday's verdict, the conviction of Donald Trump on 34 felony counts. One major concern is that the American people see a two-tiered justice system. Speaker Mike Johnson was asked specifically about that over on Salem News Channels this week on the Hill. Take a look at what he had to say.
Let me ask you about that, Speaker Johnson, in terms of how do you restore confidence once it's lost?
Well, you have to rebuild the trust and the faith of the people, and that's a series of actions to do so. And it begins as soon as the new administration takes office. It begins early next year with a change in leadership. And we've mentioned, I believe we're going to have control of the White House and the Senate and the House. And what we'll need to do is a true reform agenda. You've got to start with the leadership of the Department of Justice itself. We need an attorney general who actually will adhere to the rule of law and demonstrate that on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to the people to rebuild that. And then you'll need, persons at all levels of the justice system to do what is right and to communicate with the people and show that this is happening. Congress will have a role as well. We have an oversight responsibility, of course, over these agencies. And when we're in charge, we'll be able to lay out very clearly for the people what's being done and why they can trust the system again. We have to restore the idea that there is equal justice under the law. There are not two-tiered systems that run in this country. And I just think it's critically important, and it can't begin soon enough.
Elaine, this is critically important, as the speaker just said, because this isn't just about Donald Trump. Americans are now looking at this, and they see a two-tiered system. What do you think is the step forward? Do you agree with what Speaker Johnson has laid out?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we look at how do we restore the faith in the legal system. This verdict, I believe, shattered Americans' faith in the rule of law and our judicial system. I hope that as this case makes it to the New York Appellate Court, that cooler heads prevail. We tend to see more reasonable things happen at the appellate level. So I hope that does happen. I am willing to make a bet, though, that if Trump had used funds from his campaign to pay this expense, when the DOJ looked at this 7 years ago, they would have prosecuted him for exactly what Alvin Bragg prosecuted him for, using the funds as a personal expense and using personal funds. So I think, unfortunately, most Americans probably see this as he was damned if he did and damned if he didn't, because they were going to get him.
I think you're right. If you look at the law, in fact, John Edwards was prosecuted for this. The jury acquitted him for that. And Robert Charles. Hillary Clinton was fined by the FEC for using over $100,000 for what became the Steele dossier, which was done through her campaign. This does feel like they just decided we got to find some law that we can use against Donald Trump, and they're going to use it. And that's third world stuff. How do we walk back from this?
You're right, Frank. You're right, Larry. It really was. It is a third world way to look at the rule of law. It's a fundamental breakdown of the rule of law. We had effectively as a phony trial that produced a phony conviction. And I think the bigger implications go, as already discussed, beyond Trump. What you're looking at is a breakdown in trust on the part of the American people in what their judicial system represents. I think if you look at Democrats right now, there's a kind of a fear and a complicity associated with their silence. They don't want to step out of line, and they kind of think right now that the ends are going to justify the means. I think on the Republican side, although I love what Johnson said, I think there's kind of a feeling right now of powerlessness, waiting for the appeal to happen, trying to see how fast it can happen, with sentencing set just before the Republican convention. You mentioned third world stuff, Larry, and having seen all this develop as we all have, and having run oversight for 5 years and having been a litigator myself, I really think it's jarring. It's jarring to the average American. And if you think about the implications, it opens the door to judicial abuse across the country. It opens the door to sort of an open-ended prosecutorial misconduct new standard where you can do these things and not be held accountable. It really, at the state level as well as at the federal level, opens the door to election interference without any checks and balances. And to me, it feels a lot like, and to borrow a little bit back on the law, it feels like a resurrection of the Plessy v. Ferguson case from 1898.
Hmm.
That was a case that said everything is okay as long as it's separate but equal. Blacks can be treated differently because they're Black. And right now what you're hearing is Republicans can be treated differently because they're Republican. It makes an abomination of constitutional law. And I really do hope, as Elaine mentioned, that what we will see is either the New York Appellate Court, which is actually the highest appeals court, or the U.S. Supreme Court will intervene quickly and say, no, we don't conduct judicial process this way. We don't keep information out that is relevant and should be considered evidence. We don't include information which is prejudicial. We don't make rulings that are patently biased. And we do not allow a prosecutor to create out of whole cloth a felony charge.
Yeah. Elaine, let me follow up on something that Robert just laid out there, where, many Republicans and conservatives are going to look at what Speaker Johnson just said and said, okay, that's fine, but that's not good enough. I mean, they're saying, okay, fine, you crossed that Rubicon. It's time now for Republican DAs or attorney generals in red cities or states to go after Hillary Clinton, or to Barack Obama for the abuses of the FISA warrant system during the Russian collusion investigation, or for that matter, Hunter Biden, who we have documented evidence utilized prostitutes and did drug deals and other crimes that he is not facing a courtroom for. Are they wrong for wanting fire to be fought with fire?
Look, I was always raised two wrongs don't make a right. And I still believe that we have to get back to governing. We have to get back to fairness, and we have to get away from people thinking that there's a two-tiered justice system. We are literally seeing the politicization of regulatory agencies, DAs across the country, the DOJ. People don't trust the FBI anymore. I mean, there is a continuous theme here that has made people not trust government agencies. And I think regardless of what party is in the White House, and regardless of what party you support, you should want to support bringing back the rule of law and bringing trust to our government.
Yeah, Robert, the speaker is sort of in he's in a tough spot if he's wanting to act responsibly and instill this sense of fair play with the American people and let them know that they can still trust their government. Yet at the same time, since this was such a highly political move by the Democrats, he is being called to fight fire with fire, as I said, and be just as political until there's some kind of détente. Can Republicans just listen to their better angels and say, no, we're above that? Or do they need to play hardball?
I think you can play hardball, honestly, Larry, without becoming unethical or participating in prosecutorial misconduct of the kind that we just have witnessed. I think I would look back at this, and I guess I take a slightly different view in that I think this is a tipping point. I really think this is an inflection point in the American perceptions of their own justice system, and it needs to be remedied. I'm really glad to hear Johnson's optimism about how, and in fact, what he said was exactly right. I mean, I conducted oversight of the Justice Department for 5 years, ran the Waco hearings and a bunch of other questions about FBI, DOJ, election interference back in the 90s. And I will tell you that restoration of confidence in the system is critical. But I see this a little bit differently. I see it almost like a crack in the Hoover Dam, or by coincidence, today is the 135th anniversary exactly, May 31 of 1898, when the Johnstone Dam burst and killed thousands. And the reality is this is a potential dam burst where you change the whole perception nationally of what we should be expecting of our judicial system. And again, having traveled the world, this is the way justice is dispensed, with pure politics and no reference to an unmovable standard in places like Bolivia and Laos and the former Soviet Union and currently in China. We do not want that to become our norm. And I think we have to aggressively speak. I would like to see some Democrats speak up and aggressively say, no, this is not how we manage the separation of powers, the fair administration of justice, and the impartial basically implementation of the United States Constitution, Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment, due process, equal protection. We're in a troubled spot, Larry.
Yeah, and there's a reason why this sort of thing has never been done before, either to a presidential candidate or a former president. And certainly I would think, and I'll let my word be the last word, I would think that if you're going to break that precedent and go after a presidential candidate or a former president on a felony charge, it shouldn't be some novel, new, sort of invented, creative, nuanced way to apply the law. It should be kind of a slam dunk without any doubt, because there's a lot of doubt here. And that is an unsteady platform for the American people to have to stand on. There are nearly 30 million small businesses in America, and they employ nearly 60 million workers. And no organization does a better job defending them on Capitol Hill or in the states across the country than Job Creators Network. And never before have small business owners needed more defending. Heavy regulations, high inflation, high interest rates, high taxes, all caused by the policies of the Biden administration. They aren't just crushing hardworking American families. They're crushing hardworking small business owners across America, too, the lifeblood of our communities and driving force of our economy. If you own a small business, work for a small business, you care about your local small businesses, you need to join the fight to support and defend them. To become a JCN freedom fighter, go to joinjcn.com, and there's no cost to you. It'll really help small Main Street businesses across the country. Learn how you can support your local small businesses and defend the American dream itself. Go to joinjcn.com. That's joinjcn.com now. Say what you will about what happened in that Manhattan courtroom this week. I think most people would agree that politics is driving all of it. And certainly the political fallout now needs to be measured. The Trump campaign has put together their first video ad, and take a look.
Thank you for joining us here today. Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts.
This case is an abomination. You know, it's obviously political. 7 years to try to come up with this case. They're just wrong on the law.
The only crime that Donald Trump is being prosecuted for is the crime of running for president.
Political persecution at the highest level.
They've quite frankly given up on trying to beat him at the polls. Either going to steal it or stop it by law firm.
A Democrat prosecutor elected on a Get Trump platform.
What's going on here is a disgusting disgrace. It is war on Trump. It is war on the Republican Party. And it is a war on the Republic.
This case is the weakest case I've seen in 60 years of teaching, practicing, and writing about criminal law.
I doubt the New York indictment would have been brought against a defendant whose name was not Donald Trump.
This judge, I mean, you don't need a prosecutor if you have a judge like this. This judge is not on the level.
It's a terrible case, but the judge has been pretty much a rubber stamp on everything that Bragg has wanted to do.
They're perverting the system of justice. You know, that's where the danger lies. The corruption and subversion of our institutions by the left.
This is the Democrats' entire strategy, to confine President Trump to a dirty criminal courtroom and keep him off the campaign trail where he can bring his winning message to voters across this country.
New York has become a legal banana republic. They are so determined to get Donald Trump.
Look, convicting Donald Trump, that's all they have.
I think they have no cards, and they're depending upon Trump getting convicted.
That Trump train doesn't show any signs of slowing down.
The only verdict that matters is the verdict at the ballot box.
Well, Robert, it's a powerful ad, and it certainly shows that they're not shying away from this. They're not trying to hide this thing in the closet. They're wrapping themselves with it and wearing it proudly. They've made Donald Trump one of the richest people in the country, one of the highest profile people, a TV star and former president. They've turned him into a sympathetic victim in all of this, it appears.
You're right about that, Larry. I mean, what I see happening here is the raw display of power. They have the power to abuse their position. We know that, from the oldest tomes, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think what they've done is they've turned Donald Trump almost overnight into Nelson Mandela or to Alexei Naftali. I mean, I watched this all over the world. I was in countries as an assistant secretary of state for Powell where this is exactly what happened. People were thrown in prison for political purposes, trumped up charges, misuse of laws that we had helped them write in many cases earlier on in order to achieve a political end. It is a gross miscarriage, not only of justice, but it is an assault. And I really think Dershowitz was right and Levin is right. It is an assault on the Republic because we, the average Americans, and I don't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I don't care whether you like Donald Trump or you don't, this is an assault on the principles that make us a republic. Without the principles of fair administration of justice, impartial administration of justice, fair interpretation of the laws, due process, and equal protection, we are not any longer a republic. So I consider it a really significant moment, and I think Americans have to get sober for a moment. They need to just stop and say, this is not business as usual. We have to be much more careful about how we allow people to utilize the institutions of the judiciary and of prosecutorial power.
Elaine, there was a quote earlier this week in a political piece that was talking about patent freakout, I think was the word they used in the Biden campaign right now. And Democratic strategists said, if this campaign is about, were you better off during 4 years under Trump versus 3.5 years under Biden, Biden loses that every day of the week. Is there a danger here that the Trump campaign is taking their eye off a really winning message having to do with the economy and jobs and inflation and what is absolutely a slam dunk issue for them?
Well, I think one thing that President Trump did very well for the last 6 weeks sitting in a courtroom was every morning and every afternoon he spoke to the media, and he did in fact give us those kinds of messages and talk about the economy in addition to the court case. But he did talk about those messages. I think he will get back to it fairly quickly. He knows that's the winning message. But the Democrats do this at their peril, and I think they'll continue to freak out because every time they have done something to him in the courts, he continues to be propelled. Again, this verdict has shaken Americans across the board because if it can happen to him, it can happen to us. And as powerful as he is and as wealthy as he is, this is still a David versus Goliath case. And what I remembered last night when I heard that his campaign page his donation page had crashed because so many people were donating. I remembered in 2009, a woman at a town hall for Senator Arlen Specter when the Obamacare fight was going on, and she stood up and said, "You have woken a sleeping giant." And I feel like we are there again. And I feel like we will see that in November because people don't like this unfairness.
Let me follow up with that. I think that you're right. But also, the media plays a big part in this. They've been covering this wall to wall. They're probably going to continue covering this. And I wonder if that also puts their thumb on the scale where if they're talking about this, they're not talking about the border. They're not talking about inflation. They're not talking about job issues. And so the voters are really just getting inundated with Trump saga information where this whole election, instead of being a referendum on the sitting president, ends up being really about Trump and whether Trump should prevail or not.
Look, I think unless this judge takes him off the campaign trail by putting him in jail, he's going to go out and campaign, and he's going to carry that message to the American people. The reality is inflation is up 20% cumulatively under this president. Energy costs are through the roof. Normal, everyday, ordinary Americans are hurting. Small businesses can't get access to credit. And even though the reports say inflation is up 20%, our small business owners tell us that prices are even higher. Americans feel that. And as much as they're hearing about this case, and they'll continue to hear about this case as the weeks go on, every day that they go fill up their tanks and every day that they go and buy groceries, they're going to be reminded of the economy that continues to hurt them, and they're unable to make ends meet.
Yeah, Robert, the way the media is covering this, I'd love for you to react to that as well, because they're a player in this. They're enjoying all of the ratings and all of the clicks. But in the long run, if they're trying to make Trump look bad, they're actually, as you just saw from the ad from the Trump campaign, they're contributing to the narrative that everyone's against Trump. It's Trump against the world.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll ever reel the mainstream media back in again, at least not in the current moment. So I have very little faith in them. I also agree with Elaine that really the economy is the governing, that was up until now the primary governing issue. And most Americans, I would say a decisive majority, have little faith in Biden, and for all kinds of reasons, and understand the distinction between Biden's economy and Trump's economy. And that will be decisive. I mean, I'm up here in Maine and people are struggling, just as Elaine says, just to get by, just to be able to pay food. Unaffordable housing is out of control. Many of the, I work with seniors and young people are suffering from unaffordable housing, and really their pensions are going away if they're on a fixed income. But I'm going to tell you that I really think we are witnessing here a layered campaign. What suddenly happened just in this last few days is that we have moved now to a point where election interference, as well as the idea that we could be targeted the way Trump was targeted by an abusive government, has become possibly the primary issue for Americans. And that's going to turn Democrats. You can see independents beginning to shift in his direction. I'm not a pollster. I don't know much about politics in general, but I will tell you that the gut feeling I have is that the economy and issues tied to foreign policy and the border were already heavily tipping for Trump. And now what you see is this overt, desperate, shrill election interference occurring, and it really ticks people off. They really do understand the stakes are high.
If I could just make everybody's head explode for a moment, I'm going to float this out there, and I'll just let you sit and think about it for a moment. We still got 5 months to go until Election Day. As we draw near to another critical election, it's not only about casting your vote, it's about elevating your voice. As AMAC's membership grows, Washington listens. If you love America, visit amac.us/Salem to become a 4-year member for just $30. Membership gives you access to the AMAC magazine, money-saving discounts, trusted news, sweepstakes, and more. By joining the over 2 million members, they can't ignore your voice. Join now at amac.us/Salem. That's amac.us/Salem. So one of the big questions after yesterday's verdict is, how will the voters react? Well, if this is any indication, they're going to be supporting Donald Trump and rallying around him. Take a look. This is a screenshot of the Win Red website shut down, busted, just an hour after the verdict came in. Why was it busted? Because so many people were overloading the website with donations. In fact, this morning, the Trump campaign announced that they shattered their records after the verdict came in. $34.8 million. Even more importantly, Elaine Parker, 30% of those donations were from first-time donors. Is this a boomerang that the Biden administration will be sorry they ever threw?
Well, it seems to be a lesson that they just can't learn, because he continues, every time they hurt him in the courts, he continues to do well. I mean, I think it just shows that Americans love to root for the little guy. And as we were talking about, the inflation is still there. All of those economic woes for the American people are still there. And really the only message that the Biden administration has is they've got 3 top messages. It could be worse, abortion, and climate change. And those 3 things don't help people buy gas or buy groceries. And that's what people are going to feel. And that's what's going to be on the ballot in November, 100%, as far as I'm concerned, because I talk to small business owners every day, and that's what they're telling me. There's a credit crunch, there's inflation, there's labor issues, there's government red tape coming like crazy. I mean, under the Biden administration, there's been to date $1.6 trillion in new regulations, and 1.2 trillion of them have occurred this year alone. That's a disproportionate impact on our small business owners. It hurts them when they're hurting the most right now. And the Biden administration just continues to come at them with mandate after mandate after mandate.
If I could follow up on that with you, Elaine, because I think that this is an incredibly critical component here, because those small business owners that you're just talking about, what they're seeing telegraphed by the administration and by the Biden campaign is getting Trump is more important than fixing the economy. Getting Trump and stopping Trump is more important than creating a better climate so that people can start hiring again and those small businesses won't get squeezed. In fact, this week we had Karine Jean-Pierre talk about inflation by saying, yeah, we're going to fix inflation. Biden's been on the phone with major companies telling them to bring prices down. Well, small business owners know that they're not inflating prices just because they think it's fun or that they can profit off of it. They're doing it because the costs of products, services, and labor have gone sky high under this administration.
Yeah, they are continuing to try to gaslight the American people. But if you believe the polls, then you have to believe the American people are not buying it. They know that the reckless spending and the war on our domestic energy. I mean, gosh, just a few short years ago, at the end of the Trump administration, we were energy independent. We were exporting oil to other countries. Under the Biden administration, on day one, he stopped the Keystone Pipeline and began a war on our domestic oil production. We're now energy dependent, and we have to buy oil from countries that don't like us very much.
Yeah.
And not only that, he continues to empty out our national strategic reserves, which puts us at a security disadvantage as well. That's a national security issue, and he's using it as his slush fund for his campaign and reelection. I mean, isn't that a campaign violation?
Yeah, Robert, $35 million in just one evening, 30% from new donors. Elaine just said the American people like rooting for the underdog and the little guy. Donald Trump is a television star, former president. He's got skyscrapers with his name on it. He's got a gold toilet, but he is the underdog here, Robert.
He is. I mean, I think what you're seeing, and I love what Elaine just said there, you have policy arguments and you have principle arguments. Trump was already winning on the policy arguments. As she said quite aptly, on day one, Biden cut our fossil fuel production by 24%, and he just continued to damage the economy with cuts in energy. Up here in places like Maine, that's meant a doubling of oil heating in the winter, never mind what it's done to gasoline. He lies about the economy outright, which is both an integrity and an economic issue. He did not inherit a 9% inflation rate. It was 1.2%. It went to 9% in August of 2022. So on the policy side, people already knew and were already supporting Donald Trump because he is the guy that has helped them pay the bills, allowed their, as parents, allowed them to protect their kids, and frankly was protecting the border and had lower crime, as well as a bunch of other things. What's happening, and the reason that fundraising site I think broke, is that if you asked average Americans, anybody, Republican, Democrat, Independent, what they might all believe in, I think they would say they believe in the Constitution. The Constitution, the notion of the Bill of Rights, is sort of a holy grail. It's the centering piece for the country. Rightly so. It's a collection of natural rights that were codified years ago that sort of bind us together as a people. And what the Democrats have done is they have really audaciously offended fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights, including due process, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth Amendments, never mind the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. And so people at the end of the day are saying, you know what, I have had it. I have had enough. This is the tipping point. I'm going to punch up my money to save the republic, because if I don't do it now, I'm not going to have a republic to save.
Well, let's not forget, though, Robert, that 11% of those American people will also say they believe Elvis is still alive. I just always like to remind people of that. Quickly, though, and I'll ask both of you, the Biden administration and their friends in the media will point to one poll that shows that if, in fact, Donald Trump is convicted of a felony, then very important critical swing voters in very important swing states will go in the other direction. That was asked when it was a hypothetical. Now that it's a reality, what do you think? Do you think that Donald Trump will, in fact, lose critical support because of this one label, convicted felon? We'll start with you, Robert.
Yeah, I think it's a fake conviction, and I think people understand truth and authenticity on one side and falsehood and phony outcomes on the other. And a lot of what they've done prove that this is a phony outcome. So I don't think people are going to be much moved by it.
Elaine?
I don't think so. I think it's a small sliver in the middle, and you are hearing a lot of people who you would generally see in the middle or even not speak out at all on something like this. You're seeing them speak out on the unfairness of it, and that they just think it's wrong.
Yeah. I will tell you this, though. It's there's a reason why the Biden campaign isn't talking about that booming economy and let's get 4 more years of everything that's going so great. Happy times are here again. Not at all. This is what they've had. And now they've played their strongest card with this conviction. And if that doesn't pay off, I don't know what they've got next. Something happened in the Middle East this week that could sadly be a metaphor for the last 3.5 years of the Biden administration. You'll remember in the State of the Union address, the president pledged to make a floating temporary pier so that humanitarian aid could be funneled to the people suffering in that region during the war. Well, here's what the pier looked like as the members of the military were constructing it just off the shore of the Gaza territory. And this is what it looked like this week. It broke in pieces, floated away, and washed up on shore miles up the shore from the Gaza territories in Israeli territory. The pier was functional for 12 days, cost $320 million, and now it's useless. I start with you, Robert, not just with your foreign policy hats as a former State Department official, about American effectiveness and our ability to get things done. This is a bad look.
Yeah, it's, Larry, it's more than a bad look. I mean, we ran, during the time that I worked with Colin Powell, I ran myself programs in 70 countries. We didn't have a disaster like that. And the bottom line is, this is sort of telescoping the Afghanistan disaster, the invitation of Putin into Russia, the mismanagement and the corruption tied to China, the waste of federal resources, both at home and abroad, into one little sort of moment where you can see that they don't think ahead. They're feckless. They really are all about sort of slap happy Band-Aids on things and looking back later at what could have been done. It shows me personally that the State Department is being poorly run, that the Defense Department is being poorly run, that there's no oversight, there's no foresight. And at the end of the day, we need new leadership. I mean, it all comes down to leadership. Larry, good things happen when good people who are conscientious and real leaders look in hard at a problem and look for a solution, and frankly get buy-in to create a lasting solution. That disaster is an example of how no lasting solutions have been created to any of the problems, and many of them have simply been made worse by this administration.
Elaine, this is a president who ran on Build Back Better. The grown-ups will be back in charge, a sense of normalcy, competence. Is this illustrative of what we've seen? A whole lot of money, whole lot of spending, not a whole lot of results.
Well, I think what I will say about the Biden administration when it comes to foreign policy, which is not my expertise, we focus on small business issues, but he's very, very consistent. His domestic policy on economics and fossil fuels, domestic drilling has been a disaster. And it's clear that his foreign policy doesn't look much better from my vantage point. So he's very consistent in how he runs his administration.
Yeah, and it also adds to, I mean, a lot of people compare these moments to the Jimmy Carter years with stagflation and high interest rates and people not affording to start a small business, let alone reinvest in their small business. And when you've got a high profile international embarrassment like this, it sort of does build this perfect storm, I think, Elaine, where people just have this sense of we can't get anything done right. And that then has a ripple effect back down to those small businesses that you guys are advocating for.
Absolutely. And we have certainly equated this economy under Joe Biden to the economy that was experienced under the Carter administration. We've run some ads actually that are comical in that vein. But Carter did experience the same type of economy with high inflation, stagflation, and he did have foreign policy embarrassment with the Iran hostages that he could not bring home. And so it is very similar. And I think the American people are seeing that and they're feeling it. And remember, inflation, if it was still calculated the same way as it was under the Carter administration, would actually be even a higher number than it is now.
And Robert, beyond the domestic repercussions of this and the embarrassment that Build Back Better is now floating into the Mediterranean Sea and inoperable after 12 days and $320 million, this also does have direct effect on America's stature abroad. Again, a president who said that the rest of the world will respect us again. And if you look at reports internationally about this floating pier, they're laughing at us now.
Yeah. Honestly, Larry, they've been laughing at us for a long time. They don't think this is an administration that can find their way out of a paper bag. And that's why everyone from Australia to Europe to our Middle Eastern allies are looking to others, sadly looking to China in many cases for guidance. It's really a disgrace. You know, and I'm reminded by what Elaine said and what you've said of the Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. This is truly what's going on. And by the way, he talks about statesmen in that poem. So the bottom line is this administration has essentially punted or committed unforced errors in just about everything they've touched. I think Robert Gates said something along the lines of everything that Biden touches is wrong. And it's just happening over and over again. I'm sure that this will be declared a victory because the beach didn't get away or something. It's just a disaster.
Yeah, and Robert, I'll just follow up for the last word here because you are an alum of that Reagan-Bush era in terms of working for those administrations. Is there a way for foreign policy under Donald Trump to be a campaign issue, a winning campaign issue again? You know, I think the last president to actually ride into office may have been Ronald Reagan saying, elect me and I'll win the Cold War and here's how I'll do it. And we had so many problems under Jimmy Carter with the Iranian hostages and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Generally speaking, foreign policy isn't a major issue for an election campaign, but will it be this time around?
Absolutely, no question about it, Larry. And one of the blessings of my life was to have spent time with Ronald Reagan and also with Colin Powell, not to mention George Herbert Walker Bush, but especially those two, because leadership is it changes everything. It's the magnet that pulls all the shards together. Foreign policy is a disaster right now, and that directly affects our national security, which, as Elaine indicated and you indicated, directly affect our economy here at home, our security here at home, whether it's illegal immigration. You know, we had, I think, 451 Chinese cross our border in the last year of Trump. We've had more than 24,000 cross our border just this year. The numbers across the board from other nations are similar. We have a foreign policy that is in free fall, and that's why our allies doubt us. That's why Taiwan doubts us. Our European allies doubt us. And at the end, and our Middle Eastern allies doubt us. At the end of the day, that can be changed by a strong-minded, well-centered, principled leader. And Reagan was that, and Colin Powell was that, George Herbert Walker Bush was that, and actually most of our presidents, all the way back to the beginning, have had an understanding that foreign policy plays a role in elections. This time, I think it's going to play 2 or 3 times the role that it normally plays because people feel made vulnerable by what this administration has done.
We'll let that be the last word. Robert Charles, thank you very much. The Biden campaign is hemorrhaging votes from 2 key demographics that he needs or he's done. That would be Black voters and Latino voters. Why is this happening? Well, Charlamagne the God is a very influential African-American radio host. He's making the rounds right now, and he has an opinion. Take a look.
Why do you think he's falling short among Black voters?
I think that, it's not even just Black voters. As you see, it's Latino voters, it's youth voters. I think my man Tim Ryan coined the perfect phrase when he said that, most people in America are part of the exhausted majority.
The exhausted majority. I like that phrase, actually. And Elaine, listen, a lot of the African-American voters and Hispanic voters, they're trying to get their piece of the American dream right now. And they have the benefit for the first time in 120 some odd years, they can decide this November from the current president and the economic conditions he's put forth and the last president. And well, that's a comparison that favors Donald Trump, I would think, especially for minority voters who had a better situation for themselves as young entrepreneurs just 3.5 years ago.
Well, we actually believe that it's going to be the Hispanic vote that wins this election. Whoever wins that vote is going to win the election. Hispanics are the fastest growing demographic, and they represent 15% of the electorate. So it's a huge number, and they are moving more conservative. And what we saw in 2020 is that Trump won 38% of the Hispanic vote, which almost reached George W. Bush's high water mark of 40%. And right now he's polling and beating Biden. He's polling at 46% of the Hispanic vote. We think he could make it to 50%. And so we have launched a Hispanic vote coalition with two other groups, Bienvenido and the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Coalition, which represents 40,000 Hispanic Christian churches across the country, because polls do not equate to votes. And so the goal of this this campaign is to motivate and galvanize the Hispanic vote, because Hispanics believe in everything we do. They believe in faith. They believe in family and entrepreneurship. They want safe communities. It's not just about immigration and the border for them. It's all of those things that are so important. And those are the things that Trump did very well on. And Hispanics did very well under the Trump administration, from starting businesses. They're one of the most entrepreneurial groups in the country. So we believe that if Trump wins the Hispanic vote, he will win the election.
Elaine, let me follow up with that, because you see anecdotally, it's often sort of man on the street type interviews on the news programs. But anecdotally, it appears that a lot of the first or second generation Hispanic voters will cite decisions made by this administration or by left-leaning politicians across the country. They see those decisions and policies reflective of the countries they left. They say, we didn't want this. That's why we came to America. And now you're seeing, sort of more socialist and sort of top-down economic ideas that tend to never work being employed now here in America. And is that why, does your polling reflect that? Is that why they're moving over to the Republicans? Because they're actually seeing policies that led them here in the first place.
Yes, and we've done some focus groups out in Maricopa County, Arizona, and talked to Hispanic small business owners. And that is exactly what they're telling us is we came here for our piece of the pie. We came here for American freedom, the opportunity to start a business and run a business, and the freedoms that provides. And like I said, they are one of the most entrepreneurial demographics in this country. They're more entrepreneurial than non-Hispanic than their non-Hispanic counterparts. And because of that, that's why they came here, and they see it slipping away, just like our non-Hispanic counterparts do, and they want to fight for it. So like I said, whoever wins that vote is going to win the election.
Robert Charles, are we seeing a bit of a cultural shift here? I think in the last couple of elections, we saw President Trump really appeal to those blue-collar sort of union worker, Rust Belt white voters that Ronald Reagan was able to harness back in 1980. But now about these minority voters who are also blue-collar, who are also looking for sort of the traditional American values that built this country into what we call the American dream. Is that cultural shift now moving over to Republicans, even if they are maybe losing more of the elite, affluent, suburban voters that they used to count on?
Yeah, I think that's a good analysis. I'll say that AMAC does a lot of polling, and both with Hispanics, and I'll also mention veterans. AMAC.us is finding exactly what Elaine is finding, that there is a value shift. I would reduce it to 3 words: truth, values, and realignment. The truth part is, as Churchill said, you can step on it, you can kick it to the side, you can try to destroy it. When everything's done, truth is there. Truth is that Donald Trump was incredibly good at helping every demographic of the country, Blacks, Hispanics, the various elements of the Hispanic community, all to rise. And that is, it's incontrovertible. It's right there in black and white, and they see it in their own homes and families. Second, with respect to values, and I love what she said too, because ultimately the Hispanic community, whether we're talking El Salvador or Mexico or Dominican Republic or Colombia, it really doesn't matter. They tend to be very Catholic. That is to say, they focus on their faith, very family oriented. They focus on their family, and very hardworking, above and beyond the entrepreneurship. So at the end of the day, those values are Republican values. They have become Republican values. And the last thing is what Ronald Reagan did in 1984 before is he realigned the entire country. He really realigned it less on white, black, and Hispanic as he did on the economics, which are extremely powerful. He pulled blue collar America of every kind, the trades, everybody around behind him, and he won 49 out of 50 states. And I tell you, I don't want to predict the future, but the way this is going, Trump might do something similar.
Well, and I'll add this. When we talk about Hispanic voters, first and second generation, coming here and seeing these economic policies that ruined the country they just left, you can also bring it back to our dominant story this week, which was the conviction in a Manhattan courtroom of former President Donald Trump, now current nominee for the Republican Party for president. That's just the kind of thing, the kind of abuse of the judicial system and political weaponization of the court system that many of those Hispanic voters thought they left behind when they came here from third world countries. This also may add to that potential new majority that Donald Trump is stitching together.